So I'm here today with Tony Michaelides to talk about moments that rock. Good afternoon, good morning, Tony in Miami.
Good day, sir. How are you?
I'm good, yes. Now, the book has three sort of big sections, and we're going to talk about the first one on this video, really, how you got where you got. Now, we'll skip birth, shall we? But tell me about sort of your early life and how you got to the point of seizing the opportunity of getting involved with the music business. So start wherever you feel like.
Well, the answer to that in one word really is I didn't. Because the thing is, when you're at school, you don't have careers officers who come in and tell you about a job in the music business, tell you about how to get a job in a bank or insurance companies or solicitors, all that proper jobs. So I kind of, as I mentioned in the book, when I left school, I was ready to leave school, but I kind of wasn't ready to work. But they had this thing in England called further education college, which anybody could kind of go to. And I went to one that was 70% girls and 30% guys, and I became social secretary. So I was booking bands like Vinegar Joe with Robert Palmer and stuff like that. So I had all the tickets to all the gigs, So it wasn't hard getting a date. But the thing is, I did a course in business studies, and to be fair, it's probably my least finest attribute. But it filled 2 years nicely. Then I kind of got a lousy job. I mean, I go through this in more detail in the book, but I got a job, because I needed more money to come in to go to gigs and buy records. So that was kind of my, disposable income. I was still living at home with my mother, I think, at the time. My father had passed away. Then all of a sudden there was an advert in the Manchester Evening News, which is the local provincial paper. And it should have been in Billboard, but some kind of, dizzy girl secretary had put it in the wrong paper. I don't mean that to sound sexist in any way, but it was a girl. So instead of putting it in Music Week, should I say, not Billboard, she put it in the Manchester Evening News. So I was on my way home in the train, and, like you do, you're kind of hunched up and things. And I was just reading through the paper, and I never look at the classified ads. I just look at what gigs are happening, or they had a music page. So there might be something literally to pass a 20-minute train ride when people were like on top of you. And I saw this ad for a sales representative. So my philosophy was, I kind of like looked at it, and then I didn't look at it, and I picked the paper up again, and then I got off, and I was walking home, I was thinking about it, went to bed thinking about it. Then when I got into work, I was thinking about it. So come lunchtime, I walked into the local HMV store, because this label was Transatlantic, which was folk and jazz. So it had a lot of credible folk artists like Boys the Lock, Mike Harding, Billy Connolly had a record out then. And jazz, which was Blue Note, Milestone, which are incredibly credible labels if you're into that type of music. My record collection was like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple. So I was far off the mark. So I thought, I use this phrase all the time, but, I didn't have a job in the music business. So if I didn't get it, I still didn't have a job in the music business. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I didn't get it. I reached out and got the standard, thank you very much. We will give you your letter at hand, which means basically tough luck, Buster. You not got the gig. Thought nothing more about it. And then 6 months later, I got a call from the sales manager. Are you still interested in the job? And I was bored senseless. My job at the day was in CWS, the co-op, and I was like a finance clerk, and the boss used to come in and talk to nobody. So I wasn't going to go anywhere. It was just killing time. So actually I left. And it was the story, I won't go on now, but the story about, my first interview in the music business was just hilarious. The guy driving past me in the pouring rain, I'm stood in the road waving at him, thinking, well, how can I not even get an interview to not get the job, But it goes out in a bit more elaborate detail. So, yeah, my first job was £25 a week, 1974, selling records at the back of a van. And that lasted like 2 years. And then ABC Records, which was an American label, started Anchor Records in the UK. So I moved across to work. Again, I was the Northern Region sales rep. So I did the Northwest and Yorkshire. We had 5 reps on the road, each company. And I was basically selling, records to major outlets. But, I wasn't promoting it, but I remember we had obviously Steely Dan and big country artists on ABC like Don Williams and people like that. And then they had a hit with Ace and How Long was it? Yeah, Ace, How Long? many, many moons ago. So that was my first foray. No, sorry, that was my second foray into sales. And then 78, a girl I knew who used to put displays up in stores for Island Records, her housemate was the local iron rep, and he just got a DUI, you know. What's the DUI in England? I've forgotten now. Anyway, driving under the influence. So he was going to lose his job, and she said you should apply for it. I said, well, I don't really know that I want to do promo. You know, I have to go and talk to DJs and laugh at all the jokes just to try and get my records on the radio, you know, because you learn about all the kind of, oh, what's that? It's your lunch, you know, come here, have this, you know. Says he with a bunch of freebies on the wall, you know. But I did go for it, and I went down to London, and there was just such an amazing vibe. I mean, there are some really nice photographs in the book of the war room at Ireland, you know, because the book that I really want, you know, not to dismine it anyway, is coming out in June. The 85-year-old Chris Blackwell is releasing his first book. And he was kind of a hero of mine, a mentor, you know. But when you learn about the guy, you know, he signed artists because of who they were, not just because of their talent. And as I grew through doing what I did in the music industry, you get to understand that, you know, and we'll come to it later, no doubt, with a certain, you know, favor for both of ours, Mr. Bowie, you know. But the biggest artists are always the easiest to work with because they're never late. They're never off their faces where they can't do things, you know. And they realize it's not all about them. It's about a team of people around them, you know. And all of a sudden I was part of this team. So it was the equivalent for like a, I don't know, 24-year-old or whatever I was at the time of getting knighted, you know, because he was a label I'd grown up on. And my story, Peter, is about working with people whose records I bought as a kid. And like, again, you've not heard it before, but you're hearing it now. But that doesn't happen to a kid from the north of England, you know. I went to watch David Bowie split The Spiders from Mars in front of me, and was totally pissed off with him because I was thinking, well, where's my next David Bowie record coming? You can't do this to me. And then drove home 4 hours in the pouring rain, still pissed off with him, you know. And then you realize 25 years later, you know, when you're sitting having your dinner with him, discussing the promotion that's available and he's listening to you and things like that, you know, and you are kind of part of that team, that you know, it's kind of, you know, privileged and honored aren't as big a words when you think you're dining with rock royalty, literally, you know. And the same with Steve Winwood, you know. It's kind of like, you know, buying Traffic records in the 60s and then working on his solo records, you know, into the 70s and 80s was amazing, you know. And then, of course, I had records that, you know, John Martin, Fairport Convention, Free, you know, which were all part of my record collection. It's just that I was part of that, you know, elite, if you like. And it's still to this day, although it's changed and Blackwell's moved into, you know, properties and stuff like that. It's still my all-time favorite record label, I think, you know, because those records stand the test of time. And, you know, I don't want to be this boring old bloke that bring out the cub and tell you about when the music industry was great, but careers were built, you know. You weren't looking for a great midweek chart position on Winwood or Robert Palmer or something and then thinking, they're going to get dropped and we won't release the album. I mean, it's a completely different, you know, time and place now. But it was, you know, it was great to grow up in that. And then, of course, you know, working with you two from day one and watching a group grow from their infancy gives me plenty of content for stuff like this and writing a book and stuff, because I find it incredibly inspiring for people to think that, you know, and I did little presentations for, you know, speaking gigs and things where I say, you know, have you ever seen a band play into a sellout crowd? And I have this photograph of like a big claw on the U2 tour, like 60,000 punters. And then talking about going to see him with Mark Radcliffe, who obviously you know about in the UK, who was living with me at the time 40 years ago, and going to see this band, third on the bill, you know, and half the people, well, 3/4 of the people are at the bar. And then, you know, them coming out and meeting every fan, you know, and they were just dead enthusiastic. I mean, Mark was the local DJ then. And I wasn't actually at Island. I was at Charisma because we all got laid off, the 5 of us, because Island had some financial difficulties. So I got a job with Charisma 20 minutes later, which was really handy, you know, because we all had mortgages to pay. And it was the spring of 1980. And it was like Genesis's Duke album and Peter Gabriel's Peter Gabriel 3, they're all called Peter Gabriel. So to have that opportunity of working with apart from Bob Marley, that was the biggest act I'd ever worked with. It was a great experience. But no disrespect, there wasn't a great deal of stuff on the label. So, you know, I mean, who in their right mind would phone the label up and offer to do one person's job, 5 people's job for one person's wage, for a label that already lays you off? But I did.
An unbeatable offer, I feel.
But I went back to Ireland. But it was real, to be honest, Peter, it was really U2. And that kind of me and Mark going back and sitting up at, you know, midnight, 1 a.m, having a beer after the gig and saying there's something about that band, you know. I mean, you know, Larry was a solid drummer. I mean, Adam wasn't a very good bass player. Bono's vocals were all over the place because he was so intent on like getting those 20 people looking at him and focusing on him that, you know, the high notes were all over the place. But, you know, if you listen to like Dave Grohl talk about Nirvana and how crap they were in that garage, you know, in the early days and things. Yeah, and you get the exceptions to the rule, like the Led Zeppelins. I mean, Page and people could have played because John Mayall's Blues Breakers was a great initiation, if you like. So yeah, that was what brought me back to Ireland in 1980. And then I won't go through chronologically right through the years, but then I went into, I got offered a job at A&M, which involved working with the Police, which then were the biggest band in the world, you know, Ghost in the Machine, Synchronicity. But I didn't want to leave the label. So the guy at A&M said, why don't you get back to Ireland and tell them that you'll set up independently and you work for us and them? So it wasn't my idea, but it was a great idea. So I kind of, you know, within a year, started my own promotion company, and it went on from there. And that was kind of until I came here in America, that is. So there's your short answer.
Yeah, that's a nice short answer, actually. So your career is informed by an accident of reading the Manchester Evening News.
Totally.
But,
yeah.
And the game is different, as you pointed out, that, you know, you don't, artists aren't, they're not, people don't stay with them for very long because they're worried about their career. And there were careers in many fields at that time, and a career in music was possible. So if you were telling other people how to do this, given that your circumstances were partly accidental, what would you say to someone starting out now about how to build up, you know, Helps to Live with Mark Radcliffe, obviously, as well, which we'll come to in the second part. But
yeah,
what would you say to people that you've learned about, you know, managing a career in part by improvisation and taking opportunities as they arise?
Well, first of all, you know, I have an issue with Elvis Costello, and accidents will happen, because I think I started that, you know. No, but seriously, a career in music, to be honest, Peter, I hate putting like a downer on things, but I always like to kind of be, you know, authentic and tell it like it is, you know, because people here now, I've been here 18 years in the US, and, you know, do you miss your job? I said, well, you know, what is there to miss? You know, my job doesn't exist, because my job isn't just going on and logging on and downloading playlists and things. It was personal relationships. And, you know, people didn't play my records because they liked me. They listened to them because they respected me, you know. And it was really kind of a great, I use this word, education. But I mean, if I sat down with a band here, I mean, people talk about the music scene here and things. And again, I don't want to sound like a boring old bloke, but, you know, but it's not like coming from Manchester, you know, where, I mean, the sun comes out every day. I mean, there would be no Joy Division without Rainy Days and Long Grey Coats and Gloom and Doom in the 70s of England, you know, of Manchester, should I say. But I always like to kind of say to them, you know, so where do you want to be in 6 months? And sometimes you get like, duh. Where do you want to be in a year? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And then there's kind of like little voice. I said, well, listen, if you don't know, how do you expect anybody else to know, you know? Because in the early days, you had A&R people that would go and watch a band play to 30 people on a Tuesday night in the middle of nowhere, and then bring those tapes back and listen to them in the A&R meetings and things like that. Well, that doesn't really happen now in the days of like social media, because the way that you really, to be blunt about it, a record company won't sign you unless they have to, you know, because they can't avoid you, because you've done all the work. I mean, when I was at Island Records, they had like, I mean, I was part of it in a way from promotions, because in those days, hauling U2 up and down the motorways to do every crappy little interview that would go out like at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, not in a Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, Birmingham kind of area, but in the suburbs, you know, then 2 hours to go to somewhere else. But that was kind of a form of artist development, because people like you mentioned, like Mark Radcliffe, had a show in Manchester, Cures for Insomnia, which went out 2 hours on a Friday night, 3 hours from like 11 till 2 in the morning. So only music fans would listen to those shows. But I used to love it because I took over Mark's show, which is another story. You know, he moved to London and I ended up doing his show, which lasted for 12 years. I used to love going into Piccadilly Records in Manchester and seeing like some records that I'd played actually move off the shelves over the next few days, you know, because it is like an emotional attachment with an audience. But getting back to saying about bands, I mean, first and foremost is you have to be totally committed. I mean, I always quote, U2 for me is the classic case study. I mean, coming from Manchester where, you know, when the Smiths and the Stone Roses got popular and then kind of, you know, they split up because the singer and the guitarist, you know, are ending up with more money, you know, but U2 got their house in order from day one. When they were preparing to play for the school disco, and sat down and decided to share all the publishing, which is easy to do then. But when the money comes in, it's like, no, I write all the songs, to hell with you, right, I'm out of here, you know, throw the guitar at them and things like that. That's the end of a band. And we as the punters lose out because they didn't. I mean, there's another story with U2 where they entered a talent competition in Ireland back in like 78. And one of the judges was a CBS Ireland executive, you know, who was one of the judges. And he actually offered them, it did come out as an EP in Ireland called U23 with 3 songs on. But he offered them a deal with CBS. And these 18-year-old kids turned it down because they didn't have a manager and they didn't understand the business. I mean, that's kind of a semi-Bowie story about you split up the Spiders from Mars, you lunatic. After 10 years of having one hit, you want to lose the biggest part of you. But people who are adventurous and kind of like passionate and believe in what they do. I mean, I have my own little quote. If you believe it enough, it won't be hard to convince others. But U2 just had that like, you know, wanting to get in front of people, have them pay attention. And even now, they play stadiums like they're playing to like a small crowd. So going back to, again, I have a habit of flying off. But you're not going to change that at my age.
I might wrap
the beauty. If I could edit it.
What I've got so far is your story is a testament to the power of making relationships work.
Oh, without a doubt. Absolutely.
That's how you've got where you've got. And the other things is seizing opportunities which otherwise look like accidents, like reading, you know, it is the Arnold Palmer thing. The harder I try, the luckier I get, that sort of thing, isn't it? So you happen to spot something and pursued it. But yeah, anyway, I did interrupt. So is there a third point that's
No, you didn't interrupt. I mean, I'm kind of, like I say, I mean, it takes me, I get passionate about things when I talk about, because, and I'm not making excuses for being an old bloke. We all get older, but you know, I interviewed Ian McNabb the other week and he came out with a line that I'm using myself. He told me about, you know, Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen had written like his little like life story type thing. And one of the questions somebody asked him, I think the ghostwriter or whoever, was like, do you have any regrets? And he said, I don't have any regrets. I just wish I'd given myself more time to enjoy it. And that applies to all of us, because I look back on those moments. I mean, listen, I'm not, you know, bitter about the fact that I didn't have an iPhone and there's a photo of me and David Bowie and a photo of me and this and a photo of me and that. You know, I've got a couple of photos which the wife took at the time, you know, on, you know, crappy quality and things, which I managed to include in the book, but they're very personal. It's like a CD and a 78. They shouldn't sound the same. You know, like when Beatles were making the records, they were made for transistor radios and stuff like that. But I do get kind of passionate when I go back and think, wow, that was quite a ride. But it's not until that kind of roller coaster ends that you really start to appreciate it. And, you know, when I look at the quality and the pedigree of the artists, but I do remember very, very, very vividly. And okay, shit, I've forgotten it. Yeah, you mentioned about relationships, and I think they're really important. And I think that, you know, at the time, I had people around me that were kind of mentors, you know, so I was bleeding from them without actually consciously doing it. I was watching how people went about things. I was watching around. I mean, you know, my first episode in promotion was with a bunch of like teenagers who'd had a hit record. And, you know, my introduction wasn't. I walked into a dressing room at a program in the Pebble Mill, BBC Pebble Mill in the Midlands, and they were doing an appearance, and the rep brought me in and introduced me. Oh, this is Tony, be taking over from me. The bass player slumped in a chair. He picks up a bottle and throws it at me, and it like smashes on the glass behind me. I'm thinking, whoa, that's a baptism of fire, you know. I won't mention their names. There's no point. It's insignificant. But the fact is, that's what I mean. You know, I'm kind of like, and you know, when the lead singer, when you play and the record company's there, they think they're going to get free drinks and meals. Well, I would get it back off expenses, but that's not the point. And, you know, I remember one time when they were kind of, you know, he wanted me, it took him to buy him a pair of shoes. He wanted me to give the girl behind the counter his room number. And I'm looking at him like, I'm not your kind of pimp, you know. So one day he was kind of faffing around a gig. So I went up to him in true Manc file and just had him up against the wall like this, face to face. I said, you have turned into a complete arsehole. As of now, I will be treating you like one. And he kind of changed overnight, you know. It's kind of like he was very pleasant and friendly. But you can't take that kind of, you know, like, I'm a superstar and you're just like taking my records to radio, things like that. But, you know, Bowie never put himself on a pedestal. I mean, his ability at graciousness, I mean, I know we'll come to that later, but what I'm saying is you can spot a real artist. And the thing is, going back to those early days of U2, I mean, they kind of got turned down by everybody, you know, but that resilience and persistence, and especially when you look at what we've just come through with the pandemic. I mean, I spoke about this in my interview with Ian McNabb about, you know, what have you been doing? I mean, he's 62 years old, all he's done, and Peter Hook as well, you know, about, you know, Joy Division, New Order, your own band, all you've done is play. What do you do now? Because I kind of got a little bored with people just doing like, you know, sitting on a stool at home in the lounge, playing through the pandemic. I mean, you can't sit there and expect everybody to give you a tip and then go on to watch something else. And then all of a sudden you're $50 pounds down at the end of the night, you know? So I think that the thing is with bands is I would always say to them, you know, I mean, you don't want a manager, for instance, who's like the drummer's brother, who's not good enough to get in the band, but he wants to be in the music business. Having been there myself as the bass player in a band when I was 15, arguably the only reason I got the gig was I had the largest room to rehearse in, you know, where we lived. And my mum used to bring us scones and coffee, you know, so we got pampered a bit. And then I politely kind of realized how crap I was and kind of stepped back into management, which wasn't a problem because we had no gigs and no record deal on the table. So there wasn't a great deal to do, but it kept me in the music business. No, I think there's this kind of, you know, beautiful picture that people play, but they don't understand the blood, sweat and tears that goes through it. I mean, with a lot of artists, I mean, sometimes you have a person you're used to working with in a big band and you might be a little low and you know, you don't, it's not what's up with you know, it's like, you okay, you know, because he might be playing to 20,000 people or something. And he's been on the road for 6 months and his wife's had a kid and he'd rather be at home having a pizza and watching a movie than doing all this. So, you know, everything that comes with it. But I think you really need to, you know, just getting back to really answering your point is, I always think you should get your house in order because what do you want to be in it for? Do you want to see your name on a record or, you know, get laid or whatever, you know, or do you want to like feel that, you know, this is my art, like a painter would want to have it on a wall in a gallery. I want to present these songs to people. And a lot of the people that probably we grew up on, whether it was the Van Morrisons or the Dylans or the Neil Youngs or whatever, and the Bowies and stuff, wanted to see what people genuinely thought and advance as a musician as a result of that. And you have to accept that you can't get like, and I wrote about this a little bit in the book about, you know, for instance, it's part of the game when you go out and do the interviews. So don't sit there with a miserable face because you'd rather be doing something else because that person's allowed you into their world and their audience. And even if you have to put it on, and I think, you know, it's using that word professionalism in like, with artists and stuff like you would approach any other business. And a lot of the success, I mean, look at Jagger, London School of Economics. He runs the Rolling Stones. He happens to front them and has done for 200 years. But at the same time, you know, he knows exactly every part of the process. And that's what you need to learn because it's a complicated business. You can buy everything you need to know about the music industry, book type things. But just to finish that bit off, Peter, is it's not a how to do business. There are no two bands that are the same, no two labels that are the same, no two artists that are the same.
But
So,
but in terms of your personal qualities, there is the power of relationships. There is learning to do the job really well and being professional about it, and not just arsing around. And I've heard this so many times when people say, when you work with people who are at the top of their game, they're not arseholes.
No.
So that's that. We're going to come on to talk about some of the not arsehole people in
I'm very much a no names person. I'll give them the accolades, but if they were an arsehole, I don't really want to talk about them. There's no point.
We're talking about the non-arseholes.
Yeah.
People who you do mention in the book, in other words. So we'll come on to that in part
one.
But in terms of part one, that's been an absolute pleasure. And I recommend that people get Moments That Rock from the beginning of June, which is when this video will come out probably. But thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you, Peter. Pleasure.